Hey guys, so during class today, we went over some basic stuff like about, looking at the syllabus, how the class operates, and everything else. Well, what I want you guys to do tonight is to consider some stuff that will help you for the entire year as we jump into 2023, 2024. So, if you look around the room, you may have noticed that I have a couple of things up that I kind of want to address right now. So, one of them in the back of the room, and there will occasionally be a giant whiteboard there because I got nowhere else to put it. There's a series of 6 posters, and I want to address these quickly because it's going to be something that keeps coming up all the time. And the posters that I have encourage you to think like a historian. Let me see, I got a pointer here somewhere, I think. I don't know where that pointer went to, but darn it. Oh, I hate it when it happens. What does think like a historian mean? During the course of the year, we are going to look at a lot of topics and we're going to deal with a lot of subjects that are, to say the least, mildly controversial. They they will be things that will pop up now and then that are really uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about. One of the things that should hopefully make it easier when we're talking about things that are uncomfortable, and those things might include stuff like how certain people of certain ethnic backgrounds were perceived or treated back in the day. It would be helpful if you can sort of always fall back on these kind of 6 basic ideas. Now, they're not; these are not perfect characterizations, but they're not meant to be. They're just meant to be something to help you. So, number one, contextualization. The word context literally kind of means something to the extent of the conditions that were going on at the time. You have to understand the context of something that was going on. There are going to be things that we talk about that are bad things. But at the time, people genuinely may not have understood that they were bad. Does that make them any less bad? No. But it should help understand why it was at the time that people did them or thought they were okay. You really shouldn't judge an event in the past based on how we perceive something now. You need to look at how it was perceived when it happened. Sometimes events are going to be like, how could you do this that was just horribly bad? It's wrong, it's evil. And sometimes it's just, how could you do this? Because that was really dumb. Sometimes dumb doesn't come without a little bit of hindsight. Number two, argument development. We're all guilty of just like randomly throwing out opinions. I got lots of opinions, and you're going to hear them all this year. If you're going to take an event in history and throw it down and render an opinion about it, have something to back up your opinion. Know what you're saying, why you're saying it, and have the ability to sort of justify it. Sometimes we all make statements or opinions, and it can be kind of fun. Fun, goofy opinions. Maybe like what type of topping we like on our pizza, what our favorite sports teams are, arguing the merits of Marvel versus DC, um, looking at streaming platforms, any number of things like that. It's a little bit different when you begin making observations or comments about things that happened in history. And it would really be helpful for you to have facts and a reason behind your opinion. This next one, understanding the effects of time. And what it brings up here is continuity and change. How things stay the same, how they become different. Some things have to change, some things have to evolve. Because as time progresses, the way you approach something needs to be altered. General observation, let's just use a very simple one. If you play a sport, the older you get, the better at the sport you become, the more physically developed you become. Your attitude and your approach to the sport are going to change based on your own physical, mental, and emotional changes. There are going to be times and situations in history where we're going to look at patterns that begin to develop. And there are certain tendencies that people or, say, nations are going to exhibit. What you really want to look at is how those things have stayed consistent, that's the continuity, or how they have veered off and developed and become different, that's the change. But you can't do that immediately. Very seldom do things change overnight. There's a long, long period of it. And I'll just use an example that I hope that we can get to and discuss later this year. How is it that in the short space of a few years, Germany went from a democratic republican form of government in the 1920s to having an insane lunatic with a bad mustache running them and blaming all their problems on Jewish people? That didn't just happen overnight. In fact, if you really look at it, a lot of the seeds and the foundations for the development of Nazi extremism really had been there for a long, long time. It's only afterward that people can step back and go, oh, yeah, I kind of see where that was even, 50 years earlier. So you really have to look at stuff over a time period. Now, sometimes stuff is going to happen really quickly. And that has its own unintended consequences and results too. And sometimes you have to look back at that and go, this probably wasn't a good idea. Which leads us to the next one. I'm just going like this. Causation. What thing, what event, what idea, what person led to something happening? What was the cause of it? Trace back those things. Causation is going to be a big thing that we talk about this year when, for example, you look at something like World War One. World War One started because of a really silly incident, but its causation is probably a lot more complicated than the silly incident. Analyzing evidence. Understand the difference between primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are things that were actually there at the time, the firsthand accounts of people. Secondary sources are obviously the accounts that describe what was going on, but weren't by the actual person themselves. In some cases, like a newspaper can be both a primary and a secondary source, because you have to understand sort of the context that the newspaper is being written in. The books that we use are secondary, or I might even are tertiary resources. They're not direct things from the time, although they will be referencing primary sources. Last but not least, comparisons. Understanding the development of things and comparing two different things. And in some cases, that's going to be comparing outcomes with causes. You can also compare two different things going on at the same time. Making sure that you keep all 6 of these things in mind will be a good way to approach the year, because what I really want you to start doing is thinking out things, to form opinions, to draw conclusions, to really try to understand the people, the events, the whole spirit of the time that we are talking about this year. So these are the 6 things, very basic and simple, to thinking like a historian. Next, in more or less the center of the front wall is a little poster that looks like this. Don't forget the economics. When we examine things in history, very often there is an economic motive to them. And when we are looking at motives, and anytime that money, that's what economics is, it's money, is introduced, it boils down to 6 things. Now, to be a little bit more specific, economics, okay? Economics is sort of the science or the study of choices. And that involves 6 things. Number 1, people make choices. Those choices involve some kind of a cost. To get something, you must give or give up something. People respond to incentives in very predictable ways. An incentive is sort of a little push to get something. If you understand basically how people act and how they are, you can make a fairly accurate prediction or assumption how most people will react given an incentive. Now, there is going to be some variation, but there is a general rule. I mean, now, first of all, let's just keep in mind, if you have somebody who's just off their nutter and insane, you really can't count that, because they're not in their right mind and they're going to do things that no rational person would do. But for most people, you will be able to generalize that if you offer one thing in particular, you will get people to do something. Number 4, people create economic systems that influence individual decisions. All of us, to some degree or another, are indirectly responsible for the situation that we live in the world. Now, we may not be high office holders, we may not have a lot of power in anything, but we, by our choices, help set up the situations that we deal in. The people that we vote for, the people that we support, the people that we choose not to support or vote for, all affect our decision-making process. Whether it was immediately or in the past, some influence created those systems. And those systems are set up and they influence or impact the way that all of us now make our choices. Number 5, and this ties and speaks directly into BAME. People benefit, that is, they gain when they trade voluntarily. When you willingly exchange with another person, they have something that you want, you have something that they want. You come to an agreement on how that exchange is going to work. You both gain. Now, this one may be a little bit hard to sort of get a grip on because there's a part of you that's like, well, what about if I just give them money? You have voluntarily given them money in exchange for something that you want. They gain by giving you the money. You gain by getting what it is that you wanted from them. Now, well, what about like when we have to pay taxes? That's not voluntary. Correct. And this goes back to number 4 and goes into number 6 and number 2. Taxes are not necessarily voluntary, but you still gain from them. You gain roads, you gain protection, you gain things like clean water and medicine and food. So there is an exchange there, and you're still gaining. Now, you could make the argument that some people gain more than others. I'm not going to argue with you on that one, but there's still something going on there. Now, you could also make the argument that taxes aren't fair because they're not voluntary. And I'm not going to argue with you on that either. That might very well be the case. But in any event, when people are left to voluntarily set up something, they gain when they trade. When the trading economy works best, when everybody benefits. If you have something that you're willing to part with for something else that somebody has, you can both end up winning. That's how things should work, ideally. That's the way we want things to work. Last but not least, people's choices sometimes create unintended consequences. All of us are capable of being stupid, some of us more than others. Occasionally, or maybe more than occasionally, we make a choice that results in something we hadn't thought of. Let's just sort of use a very sort of unrealistic example, but I hope that it illustrates the point. A person decides that they are going to start smoking. Now, that smoking costs a lot of money to buy the cigarettes. It also results in long-term health problems. But the person doesn't really care because they number one, don't think they're going to get sick from it. And number two, they can afford to buy the cigarettes. Unintended consequences include the stains on your teeth, the funky smell that you can't get rid of anywhere. Yeah, that money is yours, but then when you have to pay other bills and you're paying all that money for the cigarettes, that creates a problem. The people around you are bombarded with the smoke, which could get them sick. It could get some people around you upset. Maybe that, person you were hoping to go out on a date with doesn't want to go out with you because of your smoking habit. Maybe that job you were looking for decides not to hire you because of the smoky smell that is in your clothes. It takes it with you. Maybe you discover that one of your family members has a severe reaction to smoke and can't breathe, and it limits the time you can spend with them. All of these were consequences you never thought of when you decided to start smoking. There are going to be outcomes that are just not foreseen, and in some cases, maybe not predictable. The cigarette example is really kind of extreme, but nevertheless, when just sort of to give an example, when my mom was younger, she grew up in an era where like most people smoked. So when my mom was in her 20s, she started smoking. And at the time she was smoking, I think she was paying 25 cents for a pack of cigarettes. When she stopped smoking 30, 35 years later, something like that, those cigarettes had gone from 25 cents a pack to $5 a pack. That was an unintended consequence. And my mom couldn't have foreseen that jump in the costs. So that's sort of something you have to keep in mind too. Not only do you have to keep in mind all of these historical concepts, but when analyzing a situation, you need to look at the economic concepts as well. And this will be a nice sort of feeder or reminder as we get into BAME, because you're going to be in a situation where it's a market where people are going to choose to buy or sell your products. There are going to be costs involved with making your products, putting your products out there, and your customers buying them. Depending on how you market yourself and what you make, there's going to be a predictable response to it. Um, the BAME government is going to try to structure a situation where it's the most benefit to everybody, including themselves. When the market days go on and you voluntarily buy and sell, it works out better for everybody. When you voluntarily decide to do a job, it works better for everybody. And occasionally there things are going to happen that nobody could have foreseen, but if we look back on it, it's probably predictable in the long run. So these are the things we're going to look over here or to keep in mind for the whole year. What I want you to be able to do is Friday, we're going to have a note check. All 12 of these concepts are going to be on the note check. Now, in addition to these concepts, there's something else that's going to be on the note check as well. So just give me a moment and I'll call that up. I am going to go here and look for the, where's the little pause button on here? Pause. Okay, so last but not least, whoa, don't do it over here. The 5 stars of the Academy. And I'm going to go over these really briefly. And these 5 things will be on the review, the note check quiz on Friday as well. So I guess maybe the first thing to answer is, why are we looking at these for a history class? Well, because all 5 of these things really do contribute to our understanding of history. And not only that, it's a good sort of approach to understanding things. And just to go through these really quickly, number 1, character is how somebody reacts to a situation and their ability to choose the right thing, the right course, or the right action at any given time, and to accept the responsibility for their choices and to accept the outcomes and natural consequences of those choices. Intellect is your ability to develop knowledge, and use reason. Intellect is not a measure of how smart you are, it's a reflection of your ability to reason things out and to have um, the right and privilege of getting better at thinking and increasing what you know. There's a lot of smart people in the world who cannot reason or display knowledge, but they're really smart. Heritage. Now, some of you think that heritage is your personal backgrounds. While there is some truth to that's your heritage um, with a little h. A big H heritage is the common experience of Western civilization. But I'm not Western, you might say to yourself. You are correct, but you are at a school that is. And the school's curriculum, the school's mission statement, the school's vision is all based in a common shared experience of a European style background with Judeo Christian, that is, of Jewish and Christian origin, ethics. You really need to understand that when you look at the people and events that we have in history, because it's that common heritage that will drive and fuel a lot of the choices that are made in history. The next very misunderstood star is the star of individuality. The star of individuality is not the desire you have for a purple mohawk. And why aren't people letting you have a purple mohawk? That's individualism and maybe just silliness. Individuality is the fact that every one of you has unique gifts and talents, and that you are each made in the image and likeness of a creator who makes you a completely separate person from anybody else. And you have the opportunity to develop and use the gifts and talents that you have and to contribute as you are. You are valuable just because you are you, not because of what you can or can't do, not because of your skill sets, not because of your money, not because of your background. You are valuable because you're you. You're a human being. All human beings have an inherent worth and dignity because they are created in the image and likeness of a grand maker or architect. That's individuality. Individuality is not, we all want to have the same kind of like, individuality is not conformity. Conformity is when everybody does the same thing. When all of you want to not wear uniforms or follow a dress code because you all want to dress pretty much the same way, oddly enough, that's not individuality. Individualism is the belief that you alone are important, nobody else is, and you can do everything by yourself. The truly humble and great person will recognize their own gifts and talents and the gifts and talents that others have that they personally do not. And they humbly and respectfully allow others to do what they're better at. We'll talk about that more, but individuality is very misunderstood. I actually did a video on individuality for the school a few years ago. I can see if I can dig it up later. Last but not least, probably the most misunderstood of any of the five stars is the star of truth. The star of truth is not honesty. Honesty is a character issue, but being honest is an example of truth. Truth is the understanding that certain things are just real, knowable, and objective in their reality. Right and wrong, good and evil, are real things, and that through intellect, there it is up there, looking at our common heritage, examining how our character is formed, and respecting everybody's individuality, this good and evil can be known and understood, regardless of what your beliefs or lack thereof or your backgrounds are. The Star of Truth is predicated a lot on something called natural law. That is the ability for people to come to the conclusion that certain things are just right and wrong, regardless of what culture you live in. It is wrong to take the possessions of another. It is right to protect the rights of people. It is wrong to deprive somebody of their life. It is right to protect and secure life for others. It exists on its own. It's not something people have to come to an agreement on. You don't need a majority of people to say stealing is bad for it to be bad. Okay? It just is, whether the majority agrees with it or not. Think about this. There have been times in history where the majority of people believed that slavery was a good thing. It didn't make it a good thing because it violated the essential truth that all people, because they're all individually made in the image and likeness of a creator, endowed with equal dignity despite different gifts and talents, that all humans have the same right to freedom and life. And yet, for a long time, the majority of people either said that it wasn't true or didn't care. That didn't make it that way. The idea that the majority dictates what is true and not true is called relativism. It's a really bad idea. Truth is not subject to change. There may be circumstances that truth becomes a little bit harder to tell. Like, let's look at the instance of killing. Murder is wrong, but self-defense isn't necessarily wrong, even if you're killing somebody in self-defense. So there are areas that have to be examined, but they're not subject to change. It's not like you wake up tomorrow and go, you know what? We were wrong about that whole murder thing. It's actually okay. No, it doesn't change. The Star of Truth is not that we just don't tell lies. The reason why lying is a violation of truth is because you're presenting something that is objectively not correct. You are presenting something that is wrong. And therefore, it violates the Star of Truth. It's not because I didn't tell the truth. Telling the truth means witnessing to the good, the right, the true, the beautiful. So truth extends beyond honesty. Truth has more to do with the entire nature of what is real and what isn't. So these are the 5 stars, and they tie into a lot of what we're going to be talking about this year in history. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up, we are going to be looking at the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and Washington's farewell address briefly before we jump into looking at where you left off from last year for a little review and then jumping into some new stuff. And when we look at people, you have to keep in mind how they reflect these 5 stars. And in some cases, there are going to be great versions of it. In the case of George Washington, in the case of some other people, maybe not so much. But that's something that we can look at and talk about as the year progresses. So thanks for holding on through all this. All of this stuff, the 5 stars, thinking like a historian, it's 6 traits. And these 6 traits of economics will be on the open note check on Friday. Please make sure you have them in your notes. Peace and love.